I want to welcome all of you to the February meeting of the members of the Dormitory Authority and thank everybody who was able to make it out. We are not going to have the President CEO here today. He is under the weather and I think wisely has made the decision to stay at home and probably to stay in bed. The inclement weather has caused us to go back to the tripartite meeting format, and we will have a member in Buffalo. There are members here, and there will be members. There are members in Albany. The staff is split between Albany and New York City. For those of you who had the courage, and they're at this table, to come down here from Albany today, in spite of the weather predictions, I say I'm not sure that this meeting is the punishment or the reward. but in either event, you're here. Thank you very much for making that sacrifice. And for those of you who did not elect to come down, I want to congratulate you on having made the decision that it makes more sense to be safe than sorry. It's good to have you all at the table in Albany. So, let's go to the agenda. The members have all had an opportunity to review the minutes of the 10 January board meeting. Are there any proposed divisions? Any questions about the minutes? Any additions to the minutes? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes? Thank you very much, John Johnson. Is there a second? Joy Romsky. Thank you very much for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye. 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 Are there any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. We're going to do something that's a bit unusual. I'm going to request a motion to go into executive session to discuss the financial and credit histories of particular corporations. May I have that motion? Thank you, Paul. Beryl, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye. 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 There are none opposed, so we are in executive session. Let the record reflect that the board has just left a closed session, executive session, during which no decisions were made other than to return to the public session. And before, Adrian, you do what you've promised us you're going to, I wanted to first apologize to Mike Corrigan, who is here and whose name I did not mention when I introduced the folk who were sitting here at the table. So welcome, Mike.
Thanks. All right.
And if there's anybody else I've left out, please forgive me. I'm famous for that. Adrian, you were going to give us a brief budget report.
Sure. So what I'd like to do is first just provide a broad overview of the governor's executive budget that was released in January, and also address a few items of discussion from this board's January meeting that relate to federal tax law changes and potential impacts to the state. In terms of budget highlights, the President's report covers a number of items of direct interest to DASNY in the budget, so I'll let that report speak for itself. I won't go over those, but just a sort of high-level summary. The governor's executive budget closes a $4.4 billion gap, and also adheres to the 2% spending growth benchmark. In closing that $4.4 billion gap, the major gap closing components include $2.7 billion in spending changes, roughly $1 billion in revenue actions, and $740 million in other resource changes that in total close that $4.4 billion gap, and again does so while adhering to the 2% spending growth benchmark. The executive budget also, the actions proposed in the budget also substantially reduce the projected gaps in the years beyond fiscal year 2019. And the budget division estimates that if future budgets are similarly held to the 2% year-over-year growth benchmark, that those remaining gaps would essentially be eliminated, and even in some cases there might be minor surpluses. So second, the timing of the enactment of federal tax law changes in late December and the release of the executive budget 3 weeks later presented an obvious time-constrained challenge for policymakers in evaluating the impacts of the federal tax law changes and considering options in response. To guide that evaluation and the consideration of options by state policymakers, the Department of Tax and Finance in January issued a report subsequent to the release of the executive budget, which explores these options essentially in 4 parts. And I'll just touch on them briefly. First part is our additional opportunities for charitable contributions to benefit New Yorkers. Second are policy options for reducing income taxes and shifting to statewide employer compensation expense tax. Third are options for a new statewide unincorporated business tax offset by personal income tax credits for business owners. And fourth part really discusses impacts on New York's tax system and outlines potential state responses. And if you haven't had a chance to look at the report, I believe copies have been made available for everyone to review, at your convenience. And then, as you know, the governor's budget is not considered complete and final for the legislature's consideration until what's known as the 30-day amendment period has expired. And essentially, as the name implies, this occurs 30 days after the executive budget is initially introduced. And during that time frame, amendments to the governor's budget can be presented. State policymakers are actively considering the framework of options and all their permutations as outlined in the tax department's report, and it's anticipated that within the 30-day amendment period, which will be no later than February 15th, coming up soon obviously, the budget will be amended to include a specific proposal or proposals in response to federal tax law changes. So, as soon as practicable after the 30-day amendment period, I know there are additional questions from the members, and the Budget Division would be happy to come back to the board, provide a detailed presentation with the relevant experts from the Budget Division there on the policy choices that are ultimately included in the 30-day amendments. And finally, I know there's been some discussion of the impact to personal income tax revenue bonds, and I would just point out and direct your attention to, I believe, on page 12 of the report, get a chance to read it. It describes the PIT security structure that I think we all discussed at the January meeting that in part Bond Council walked us through, and you'll see that section of the report emphasizes the state's commitment to maintaining the credit quality of the state PIT revenue bonds, and also emphasizes that to the extent any changes are made in the 30-day budget amendments that affect personal income tax receipts, it is expected that legislative changes would be considered as necessary to protect the PIT dedicated revenue stream and hold bondholders harmless. And just as an example, 75% of the PIT receipts are currently undedicated, so that's a number that could theoretically move around. Are there any questions from the board?
Questions from the members? Adrian, thank you very much for the presentation. We'll look forward to your expansion of the presentation at some point after the 30-day period is in. couple of things. One, John Gardner did join the meeting and is in the Albany office as a voting member. Sandra? Well, I'm sorry, Albany. Buffalo office, thank you. And Sandra, are you on the line?
I am.
And Sandra Shepard is with us on the telephone as a non-voting member. So we've got close to a full house. The next item on the agenda is the report of the Finance Committee. Chairman Romsky.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We met yesterday afternoon. We approved the meeting minutes from the January board meeting and then advanced and discussed one resolution, the school district revenue bond financing program. After taking note that there was a updated bond council letter that made certain revisions, we had some discussion, and after that discussion, we unanimously agreed to recommend approval of that resolution at today's board meeting. That concludes. Oh, actually, we also did a health financing for helping Portia. Mary, yes, and we approved that offering as well. Thank you very much, Portia. Thank you. That concludes my report.
Any questions for Chairman Romsky? Hearing none, the next item on the agenda is single approval financing. It's behind tab 3, the school district's revenue bonds financing program. Single approval credit summary with David Ostrander presenting, along with co-bond counsel Eileen Heitzler of Orrick, Harrington, and Sutton. Yeah, there's no reason to sit behind Eileen, thank you for coming in the weather.
The weather's not a problem. It's the subway has a bit of a, I think they called it a major delay while I was on.
David, you have the floor.
Good morning.
Good morning.
The board is being asked to adopt the necessary documents to authorize multiple series of tax-exempt and/or taxable bonds in an amount not to exceed $500 million to be sold through multiple negotiated offerings on behalf of various New York State school districts. Proceeds from this authorization may be used to refinance the bond anticipation notes or bands of various New York State school districts, to finance the new money projects on behalf of these districts, as well as to refund bonds issued by DASNY through the school district's revenue bond financing program. I'll just point out that the refunding component is not likely. As you know, we've done a number of advanced refundings in recent years with the new tax law prohibiting advanced refundings, and there being really no current refunding candidates. We don't expect any refunding bonds through this program this year. So really the intent of this authorization is to accommodate a new money and band refinancing pool that will be closing in June. I'll point out, we are getting an earlier start than we typically do. Usually we come to the board in March. We're coming a little bit earlier. We do expect a larger pool, and this allows us to get an earlier start and get the documents out to the districts. We had 40 districts last year, and we expect probably at least that many this year. Really the reason behind that, the driving the interest in the school pool is really based on how the school districts are reimbursed. So, as you may recall, school districts that issue on their own receive building aid based on the statewide average rate, which is at 2%. School districts that issue through DASNY receive building aid based on their actual cost of borrowing. So, as rates increase, with that statewide average lagging behind, it tends to drive districts to the DASNY pool. Another factor with short-term interest rates rising, it's less beneficial for the school districts to renew their bands. So again, it pushes them towards the pool. As Eileen will discuss in more detail, there's some changes to the master resolution, but I just will point out that the structure and security that the board is used to seeing and has seen in previous years will not change from previous school district pools. So, Mr. Chairman, that's all I had.
Thank you, David. And as I do often thank you very much for the flow chart. It makes this a little easier for those of us who are truly visual to understand. Thank you. Eileen, please.
I just want to discuss briefly the changes to the master resolution. As you know, the master resolution was adopted in 2002. I did have the privilege of working on that initial transaction as well as several along the way. didn't have reading glasses, I think, at the time. But it's been about the same. The master resolution provided for multiple series of bonds, but each series would be authorized by a series resolution. As you know, through the years, you've adopted series resolutions, I think originally maybe with letters and then with numbers. They're rescinded, they're issued, new ones are adopted. It's just administratively that's become somewhat burdensome. So we wanted to amend to provide for a supplemental resolution to be adopted that would authorize one or more series of bonds. And that change, initially when I sent out the letter, we had anticipated, 16 years later, let's just adopt a new master resolution. When we went, again, really the major changes are to allow for the authorization of the series through a supplemental resolution instead of these multiple series resolutions, and to update some of the investment guidelines. When we re-examined the provisions relating to how the security works when a school district has requested DASNY issue bonds under multiple series over multiple years, how the state aid intercept works when school district A may have bonds from 2012 and 2015 and 2018, we realized it would be better to stay with the existing master resolution. So the amendment to the letter was to say, instead of a new master resolution, we'll amend and restate the existing one. This amendment and restatement applies for bonds being issued from this point forward. And again, the amendment and restatement is to provide for a supplemental resolution. So the changes are that authorization provision, and then where series resolution was mentioned throughout, it became supplemental resolution. And again, the updating of the investment provisions. So the changes are not extensive in that sense. Again, we'll amend and restate the master to provide for this. And so as you saw in the black lining, sort of the first paragraph was black line, but after that, it was all the same description. We're also requesting that you adopt the first supplemental resolution, 2018-1, which would authorize one or more series, as Dave said, tax exempt or taxable, up to $500 million, up to 31 years maturity from the date they're issued, up to 7.5% interest rate, and the other parameters are described in my letter. It also authorizes execution of a bond purchase agreement, financing agreement with school districts, continuing disclosure agreement, preparation of preliminary official statement, all those substantially similar to what has been used in prior deals. As Dave was mentioning, the authorization and supplemental resolution do authorize as the purpose of the bonds both financing projects, refinancing bans, as well as refunding bonds. It's anticipated that the first transactions, as Dave said, would be in June and would be primarily for financing projects and refinancing bans. That's the expectation. But again, the supplemental resolution allows for series over time, and there may be opportunities for refundings along the way. It also mentioned that for the transaction, Gabriel Morris and Morris Law Firm will be the co-bond counsel. As we get closer and firm that up a bit more, we worked with them on the transaction where we were bond counsel a couple of months ago as well. With that, I think I'll ask that you adopt this. Just to echo what Dave said, the structure is the same, the flow of funds, the security, the school districts, their financing agreements, their bonds, the state aid intercept. That's all the same as it's been since 2002. With that, we'd ask that you consider
Questions
and
for
adopt the resolution.
Eileen or for David, here in New York City or in Albany, or John Gardner?
Your mute. Press your mute button, John.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. This is probably a question for Eileen. I just want to, I think I understand how the security works, but is it the case that if an individual school district has a problem, the intercept would apply only to that school district and the other school districts would be unbothered by it? Is that how it would work?
Yes, that's correct. Each school district is responsible just for its portion of the transaction. No school district is responsible for anybody else's. And yes, as you said, if the school district did not pay its full amount itself, the state aid intercept would kick in terms of the logistics and mechanics for that school district.
So they're not jointly and severally liable, but if one school district had a big enough problem, it could nonetheless affect the bonds, and I suppose that doesn't affect the school districts because the ones that are not in default just keep getting funded, and if there's a problem with the bonds, that happens at the bond level, not at their level.
Exactly. I mean, from a bondholder's point of view, that's assuming, again, we've done the timing, so the state aid intercept has time to work. There's time to request the money from the controller's office, time to get that money to the bond trustee to make the bond payment on time. But if there was actually, even after that, a deficiency, yes, bondholders would not be paid some small portion, but no other school district would need to step up.
Yeah. So is it fair to say this is just I'm just curious. Are financially weaker school districts better off participating in this pool because they're all blended together with potentially stronger school districts and they're all issuing the same bonds?
I think we typically divide them by rating. Right?
It's divided by rating, and the ratings vary. Moody's rates the districts individually, S&P and Fitch have a programmatic rating, but I think really why we see a lot of the weaker school districts is really based on how they're reimbursed, and if they can't finance below that statewide average, that's why we tend to see a lot of the smaller school districts and the lower rated school districts.
Okay.
But we will divide up the bond. I think we typically have had multiple series issued at one time. I think the prime driver for the division among the series is the ratings on the school district. There are some other reasons why we create other series as well, but that would be the primary one.
Go ahead.
Now, just one other point. There is often, not always, and it's not required, credit enhancement on all or a portion of certain maturities of bonds, again, for different series, which from a bondholder's perspective sort of homogenizes it. The insurer would pay even if the school districts did not.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there other questions for David or Eileen? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the resolution? Darrell, thank you for that motion, and Gerard, thank you very much for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries unanimously. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Let's see, behind tab 4, we have a proposed TELP transaction. It is for the Mary Imogene Bassett Hospital. This is going to be presented by Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Behind tab 4 is the TELP financing for Mary Imogene Bassett Hospital in an amount not to exceed $12.7 million. As you know, it's a policy of Public Authorities Control Board that TELP leases which exceed $10 million in a calendar year or a 12-month period be brought both before the authority and PACB for approval. There's an attached equipment list which outlines various oncology, cardiology, nursing, and other equipment. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Portia. Are there questions for Portia? Any observations? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the TELP transaction? Paul, thank you. Is there a second, please? Darrell, thank you very much. All in favor, indicate with aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Thank you. Thank you. The motion carries unanimously. Behind tab 5 is the report of the president. I would not presume to try to give that report, but I will highlight a few things quickly. Gerard has announced that the new website was actually introduced on 27 January. I confess I have not seen it, but I gather that it is it's revolutionary in its impact, and I'll look forward to seeing it. For those of you who have seen it, I'd love to hear about it, but not at this particular moment.
You can watch it, John, when you're doing your snowball in your driveway.
Right. With his heated handles.
With your heated handles.
No, he doesn't have heated
handles. Oh, he doesn't have heated handles.
I don't have the heated handles.
Doesn't have heated handles. Oh, jeez. A very significant announcement. On January 16th, DASNY welcomed the newest member of the One DASNY team. She is here with us today, Deborah Fasser. Ms. Fasser, is succeeding Freeman as Director of Communications and Marketing. If you have anything you'd like to say to us, we'd love to hear it.
Good morning. I don't want to take up too much time, but I'll just give you a little brief overview of my background.
Thank you for that.
I started my career off in the New York State Assembly, where I was a writer and editor, made my way up to coordinator, and then decided to move to Kentucky, where I worked for a large not-for-profit mental health center. It was the largest in the U.S. at the time. And then I moved to Harrisburg, worked in communications for a district attorney's office there, and then made full circle, started working back in the New York State Assembly again, and then worked with Tom DiNapoli while he was still assemblyman before he transitioned to the comptroller's office. From there, I ended up where I've been for the last 10 years at Corning Place Communications. It's a small public affairs firm in downtown Albany. It's also related to Hinman Straub. It's the law firm it's attached to.
Ms. Asher, thank you and welcome.
Yep, thank you.
So did that firm do lobbying work?
Yes.
Did you lobby before the Dormitory Authority?
I didn't personally lobby, although I was registered as a lobbyist. But I did the communication side of things. Some of our clients crossed with the law firm. Some of them were related to litigation, crisis communications, a number of different.
Well, having just completed the ethics, my re-examination on ethics, is there anything because of this transition you're prohibited from doing? By the ethics
No.
law and DASNY policy?
No. I'm actually going to do the training again myself in the next couple weeks. But
No, that's good. Thank you, John. Thank you. Good to know. I just completed my ethics training. I'm feeling terrible.
All ethics training on that note is due March 31st. Just a reminder to everyone. So
I thought it was February 20-something.
yeah, I thought it was before.
we're trying to get it done by February 28th.
that was
but
what
we
you
have
told
to
us.
report on March 31st.
Finally, as part of the President's report, it always pleases me to attend the anniversary celebrations and retirement celebrations, which are held in both New York City and in Albany. It's a wonderful thing that this organization actually recognizes recently departed retirees and those who are celebrating 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and in this case, this year, a 40-year anniversary. It was. I couldn't attend the one here in New York City, but it was a great event in Albany, and I was very pleased to be there. And that, I think, ends the President's report, which then takes us to a misnumbered item on my agenda. The report of the Office of Public Finance and Portfolio Management.
Well, Mr. Chairman, behind tab 7 on the Standard Public Finance Report, I just wanted to update the board on one item. As you know, at last month's meeting, we brought before the board authorization for state secured debt transaction under either the sales tax or the quick credit. So I did want to update the board that we will be undertaking that transaction under the sales tax program. As a brief market update, total new issue supply year-to-date's been about $21 billion. That's down about 45% from supply levels that were seen at the same time last year. Supply has been obviously light this week. It's a little bit more than $4 billion. That's comprised of $2.9 billion in negotiated transactions and $1.2 billion in competitive transactions. The headlines over the last week really centered around rising rates, the FOMC meeting, which left the Fed funds rates unchanged, and a stronger than expected employment report. The Fed did set the stage, though, for a rate hike in March. As far as rising rates are concerned, the 10-year and 30-year MMD have increased by 32 and 28 basis points since the meeting in January. I'd note that the 1-year MMD has decreased 9 basis points since that January meeting, so we've got sort of a steepening the yield curve. And that concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Are there questions for Portia?
How does that compare to the 10-year treasury? Is the spread more or less the same, or is it widening? at
Yeah,
all?
so the current 10-year treasury is 2.79, and 30 years 3.06. So that's what, 27 basis points between the 10 and the 30.
And
As
how about
opposed
the
to
spread
MMD,
between
which is,
the MMD
yeah,
and
as
the
opposed to the MMD, which is 2.37 at the 10-year and 2.92 at the 30-year. So,
Do you see municipal bonds more stable than the 10-year treasury as it fluctuates throughout the day, week, month? Or is it basically, is the spread just more or less constant between the treasury and the municipal 10-year?
honestly, Bill, I'm not sure. The market's been really volatile.
Right.
So I'm not sure as to the answer to that question, but I could do a
Just
little,
because it
do a little
obviously,
bit of research and
for
get back
for
to you.
long, as far as a planning mechanism for ourselves, it would just be interesting to see the relative relationship, especially in light of the fact that that the 10 years, the treasury is just unusually volatile. And if municipal bonds are somewhat more stable, at least it'll give us an ability to plan a little bit with more certainty our own future.
I'll get back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Beryl. Sandra, any questions for Portia?
No, thank you.
And John Gardner?
Nope.
Okay. No questions from Albany?
No, thank you.
All right, then. May I have a motion, please, to go into executive session to discuss the financial and credit history of particular corporations? Thank you very much, Gerard. Is there a second? Anybody from Albany raising his or his hand? Her hand?
John.
John? Thank you, John Valentino. All right. It's been properly moved and seconded. All in favor of the motion, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
Aye. Are there any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. We are in executive session. Thank you very much. The record will indicate that we've just left the closed session, and there were no decisions made during that closed session other than to return to the public session. We're going to go back in my book and on my agenda to what is really tab 6. Kim Nadeau, the operating budget report.
Thank you, Al. Just a couple of highlights. We continue to perform well against the budget. We had 7 private financings closed during December. That brings our year-to-date total to 13 closings. Fees of $1.8 million versus our $2.2 million budget, or approximately 82% of the budget at this point. 94% of our direct charges have been in support of our public clients relative to the 88% in the budget. And our operating expenses are approximately $300,000 over budget. That's approximately 0.5%. When we look at the reserves that the board established in July of 16, the Healthcare Transformation Fund, there has been no further activity in that reserve. We have spent $300,000 to date. There are no commitments. We have an uncommitted balance of $5.2 million. The Evolutionary Fund, we have outstanding commitments of $600,000. We have spent $1 million. That leaves $2.4 million in an uncommitted balance. And the 21st Century Technology Fund, we have spent $200,000. We have outstanding commitments of $2.2 million and an uncommitted balance of $500,000. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Is the rate of expenditure about what you had estimated going into this, or have you been surprised by anything?
I didn't have a particular expectation. The healthcare transformation, that was largely assumed to be an annual. Evolutionary Fund really would be a matter of the timing in which we pursue different things such as succession planning and the external consultants So that has continued to move along at a more rapid pace. And the technology fund, the commitments are there, but the spending against the commitments has been a little bit slower as we make sure that we plan things out well before spending the funds.
Fair enough, thank you. Are there other questions? Paul?
Yeah, Kim, given the rush of activity in December and then the not surprising fall off a little bit, what is the impact on that in terms of the spending and the budget overall?
We don't have any impact on the spending related to that. Not as it would impact our operating budget.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Other questions? Hearing none, we'll go to the construction projects report. Steve, are you there?
I am. Can everyone hear me?
Oh, Steve, before you start, I think Elizabeth Berlin has joined the meeting. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I can't see you, but it's good to have you. Thank you for being there. I'm sorry, Steve, please.
Okay. Good morning. Behind tab 8 are the 3 construction division reports. I'll start with the construction projects report. The featured project this month is the Kingsborough Community College cooling tower and chilled water system replacement. The project scope here was to replace existing cooling towers that were installed in 1974 and 2002, as well as associated chilled water piping and water pump systems, and to replace any of these existing dunnage steel supporting these cooling towers. The project budget was $10 million. This was an energy performance contract. Our energy performance term contractor was the Fulcrum Group. Design started in June of 2013. It completed in November of 2016. The CM into the construction phase, again, was the Fulcrum Group. The general contractor or mechanical contractor was Sierra Mechanical. Construction started in March of 17 and completed in December of 17. Some of the project challenges were due to the aging of the existing cooling towers. Temporary cooling towers were installed prior to last year's cooling season. The transition from the existing to temporary was complicated and required temporary piping and electrical work. In addition, the chemical treatment of the existing water and systems also presented challenges for the project. On page 2 of the report, there's 5 new projects that were added. At City College, there's a firehouse restoration project. This is a very old firehouse that was not used, close to campus. CUNY gobbled it up, and we will spend $7.3 million in renovating it for the campus's use. At York College, there's a track and field upgrade project to upgrade their existing sports facilities for $5.2 million. 2 projects at Queens. The first are lab renovations, project value of $5.1 million. And the College Hub, which is really a student services center, for $8.5 million. And then the New York Rising Community Center project, Howard Beach and Rockaway East, for $9.3 million. The total is about $35 million new projects. Construction expenditures on page the report's not, there are no numbers on the report, so forget about the page number. It's the second to the last page of the report. Prior year, fiscal year to date through December was $517 million. Current year fiscal year to date through December 17 is $666 million. So we've increased construction expenditures year over year by $149 million. Just a couple of project updates. I'll start with the Court Officers Training Academy, where progress continues on the project with systems, commissioning, site, and finish work continuing. The project team has commenced TCO pre-inspection activity, including a fire alarm pre-test conducted by DASNY in late January. The current project schedule targets February 2018 for substantial completion. However, we anticipate the next schedule update due in about a week will indicate the TCO date moving forward to either a March or early April 2018 timeframe. The team will be on site tomorrow for the next bi-weekly project status meeting. Mackenzie Hall renovation at SUNY Alfred. This project received a TAO in late December, and students have occupied the space, which includes suite-style floor plan for new living space, small cafeteria, workout room, and laundry facilities. SUNY Brockport, the project continues to progress toward a July 2018 TAO completion date. At this time, MEP systems and exterior finished facade work continue, as well as sheetrocking on the interior. At the CUNY School of Medicine, the renovation of Harris Hall for the addition of program space for the CUNY's SUNY Davis Biomedical Education Program has reached substantial completion as of early January, which much of the space is now occupied. The project was extremely challenging from a schedule and an existing unknown conditions discovered standpoint. At South Beach, the project continues to advance with multiple Building Package 5 activities ongoing, including light gauge metal framing installation, steel fireproofing, and MEP roughing. The corrective work associated with the utilities exiting the Central Services Building and entering our project continues, with soil backfill being removed in favor of a lightweight styrofoam material. The project remains on track to achieve a June 2019 TCO. And lastly, the Bardia Community College facade. The project stop work order issues have been addressed by our general contractor, and project activities are anticipated to renew in mid to late February. As far as just a couple of construction division operations updates, the division continues to work on the UI recommendations. Multiple construction division teams have been established to review recommendations from UI. We've heard about some of these, including small project processing, job order contracting, work authorization processing, term consultant management, and design phase and construction phase management coordination. The teams are moving forward with a review of the UI recommendations and a deeper dig into our processes and procedures for efficiency gains are ongoing. We continue with the Construction Division Winter Training Series on January 12th. Our IS group presented a construction technology and systems update for the division, which included a discussion and training session on our Construction Division dashboard. On January 19th, Laurel Apatina presented our updated general conditions. On February 2nd, we had a DASNY University introduction session conducted by Liz Moran. And on February 23rd, we will present a session on the New York City PLA. And just to close out, an update on our recent and upcoming DASNY presentations. On January 25th, I presented to the New York and New Jersey Construction Management Association of America, addressed about 100 members on DASNY's project delivery methods and pipeline. On January 30th, I presented to the SUNY PPAA, Physical Plant Association, addressed approximately 200 members on the SUNY Residence Hall program activities. Jody Smith-Anderson presented on January 29th to the ACEC of New York State on sustainable opportunities on DASNY projects. And on February 21st, I'll address the Upstate Building Owners Management Association on DASNY's MWD program. That concludes my report.
Steve, thank you. Are there any questions for Steve? Thanks very much, Steve. Last but certainly not least, the General Counsel has an opportunity to report on anything he might choose.
Mr. Chairman, I have nothing further.
Thank you. All right. Mike, thank you very much. Is there any other business to come before this board? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to adjourn? John Johnson, thank you. Darrell, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
I'm assuming that there are none opposed. The meeting stands adjourned.